Friday Night Racing
on Off the Ball.
Brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Love every racing moment. Visit hri.ie.
Yeah, you're very welcome along to Friday Night Racing this Friday afternoon, brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Love every racing moment. Visit hri.ie. You can follow the new Twitter account at HRI Racing. Johnny Ward, good afternoon to you. How are you?
Good afternoon, Ger. I'm looking at an empty off-the-ball studio, which looks quite poorly lit at the moment, which is, it's a strange sight, it has to be said.
The lights are working fine. What are you talking about?
All I can see is a darkened off-the-ball room with nobody in it.
Metaphorically speaking, that you're great, the star wattage of you sitting across from me breathing your coronavirus fumes on me isn't here. Is that the point you're making?
I can see your hand. I can see your hand now.
There you go, they exist.
Hello. How are you getting on?
I'm good, yeah. How are you? You look well, Johnny. Nothing wrong with you.
No, it's fine. I think people probably need to, look on the bright side in situations like this, because as long as we're still able to get outdoors to some extent, and to pretty much a large extent, we can sort of still do the things that we'd like to do outside, or at least of a nature element, just going for a walk or going for a run, going for a cycle. We're still able to do all these things, and still able to do a little bit of work. My family is healthy, and I think when all of this dies down in many months down the line, I think there will be positives out of it, how we live our lives and all that. But at the moment, obviously, it's difficult. Yeah,
a little bit of extra mindfulness about everything. A couple of racing stories to talk about during the week. Obviously, the behind closed doors racing was shelved. Ultimately, the Taoiseach's statement put pay to that, and almost immediately after that, the Racing Post announced that they were going to continue publishing online, but that the paper would cease for the time being. You could see the immediate knock-on impact that the stopping of racing behind closed doors had on the industry, and it was never made more manifest than when the paper stopped printing.
Yeah, I wouldn't underestimate the seriousness of this, because, as we know, newspapers are in a pretty perilous predicament for many years at this stage. And the Racing Post, for which I write and contribute, I write a League of Ireland column, and I do occasional racing articles for it and occasional work. So I should provide that caveat at the start. But the Racing Post is now entering a situation where people are going to not buy the paper for a sustained period of time. And, there's no racing going on. So there was no means that the paper could just keep publishing. Its price increased during Cheltenham. So it is quite expensive for your average sort of daily newspaper. So now it's entering a situation where, its workers are availing of the government's, 350 quid a week. But worryingly, I think for the Racing Post, if and when it does resume publication, and I actually extend this to betting on horses and betting in general, people will have become quite accustomed to just not doing it and not buying the paper, which will be 4 weeks to 6 weeks. And that's a worrying situation. I know the Racing Post does, much of its income is derived from its app and wagering on the app and so forth. So it's really been excellent in terms of diversifying income at a time when it's particularly tricky for newspapers. We saw the Irish Independent going subscription as well recently, which I think was long overdue, but very, very worrying times for the industry newspaper. And I don't think we should downplay that. I think that would be, it's certainly something to be concerned about. And that's nothing to do with the fact that I do write for it occasionally. I'd be very worried for the people who are working there long term and who are working there full time. Yeah,
the one caveat to the problems, the economic problems that are absolutely coming down the track and are here already, is that there has certainly, at a global level and the European level, almost everybody, apart from the Dutch at the moment, are signed up to the whole notion that we need to make sure that we look after the economy in a way that puts people first and puts people back to work and looks after their livelihoods and tries to re-establish what we had in some way in the immediate aftermath. And if that means printing money, then they can go and print money, and they can find new ways to kick that can down the road to try and get industries back on some kind of even keel. And it looks like the government were very committed to keeping racing going as long as they possibly could. They pulled the plug at the last possible minute, and you would assume that the level of commitment they've shown at government level over the last 20 years will continue into the future.
Well, I honestly have very little qualms in terms of how the government has dealt with this situation across the board. I think Fine Gael came out of an election in which it predictably struggled, maybe didn't do as well as it hoped it would. Fianna Fáil didn't have a great election, but I think this this is going to give Leo Varadkar a bit of a big boost because of his handling of the affair. I think Simon Harris, who's quite maligned in terms of his role before all of this, has been seen to do a good job, and I think the government has really stepped up to the plate here. In terms of racing, you know, we've seen articles. Brian O'Connor wrote an article in the Irish Times. Brian O'Connor is you know, a veteran racing writer at this stage, very well respected. He wrote an article saying that it was a known goal for racing to continue in Ireland. I couldn't agree at all with that. I think the optics of Cheltenham, and more so Uttoxeter, if people were still watching the Saturday after Cheltenham, I think the optics were absolutely horrendous, to be honest. We spoke about this during Cheltenham on Off the Ball. I was of the opinion that it should have either been called off or behind closed doors. What racing did in Ireland subsequent to that was basically go along with the government guidelines comfortably, where they held meetings behind closed doors. Brian Kavanagh is on the record today saying in the Racing Post that some race courses may well be under threat. Their actual existence may well be under threat because of this. You look at the Ferryhouse Irish National, that's not going to go ahead, and you're going to have like the loss of colossal media rights money, all the, you know, money that would come in from a corporate on the day, their big day, the Irish National, that's gone now, and that's, you know, that's just Ferryhouse. And you look at the small provincial tracks who are quite reliant on you know, attendance fees. There are real problems down the line, and racing took the option that we would go ahead behind closed doors with a skeletal attendance, only the people who needed to be there essentially at the racecourse. And once the government obviously brought the news on Tuesday that everything was canned, there wasn't a murmur within racing. I think racing people in Ireland have behaved impeccably in this. I do think they looked after themselves to an extent, but they did that within the remit of the government guidelines. And, you know, the government and the Department of Agriculture wanted racing to continue. The government is going to have an enormous bill to pay, obviously, after this. We're going to go into recession, and the government wants as much industry as possible to keep going. And I will have absolutely no qualms with saying I think racing did the right thing. And anyone who argues with me on that, I'll argue all day that racing did the right thing.
All right, let's move on, because I want to bring in our guest this week is Charlie Swan. Charlie, good afternoon to you. How are you getting on?
Yeah, good, thanks, Ger.
How are you responding to the lockdown at the moment? What's your situation?
Well, I'm lucky. I'm living down in North Tipperary near Cloughjordan, so I live on a farm, so there's plenty of work to be done around the farm, plenty of rolling and herring and stuff like that. But obviously it's tough times for everybody, you know. We're
going to have the best farmed countryside that we've ever had over the next couple of weeks.
We sure are, yeah.
Nothing to distract the farmers from, they're looking at the field and, oh, Jesus, I really should get out there and do that. It's like, OK, I'm actually going to go out there and do that and enjoy it this time.
Yeah, no, it's great. And, you know, especially when the weather is so good at the moment as well. So if there was going to be a time, you know, at least the weather is good.
Charlie, what?
I just think on that point, though, Ger, for example, like, there's so much in our lives right now that it's like Groundhog Day, where day after day we do our things, we're on our phone, we're basically kind of one day runs into the next, and there are all these things that we said we'd like to do, we never did, maybe like go fishing, plant vegetables, you know, whatever. And I think this has afforded people the chance to actually take stock and do stuff like that they wouldn't otherwise do. And there are positives if you look for them. You know, there are definitely things an awful lot of people are doing now that they've been putting off. And the only reason is because they basically can't behave like they normally have. And they're probably better for that in some respects.
So you're going to paint your house? Is that what you're telling us, Johnny?
I wouldn't go that far. Although I have had a go at making the balcony a little bit cleaner and power hosing it, so we're getting there.
There you go. Charlie, what's your official involvement with racing at the moment?
Well, I buy some horses for JP for the French horses that JP has. I sort of I'm involved in buying those ones.
Okay.
Yeah, so sort of keeps me busy. Then we have our own business here, you know, buying foals and selling them on as 3-year-olds.
How do you become an expert on the French market? Like, how do you decide, okay, this is going to be my area of expertise and that this is where I'm going to do my 10,000 hours? How did that come about?
Well, JP just came to me one day and just asked me would I be interested in doing it. So luckily I went over there and I got a few contacts, and obviously I'm not very good at speaking French, but there's a fellow there, Hubert Barb, that helps me, and you know, he knows all the owners and trainers and all the breeders and stuff, so it does make it a lot easier. But it's really about getting used to all the form out there and getting used to the different types of racing, and it's really the form, and see what your eye, you see the horses running over there. I go to a lot of the race meetings, and just what you think might and you first of all try to buy them as if they're going to be champions, and if they're not going to be champions, which very few horses are, hopefully they'll win a big race somewhere, But if you start out, try to buy the best, you have a chance. Like, there's no point buying a horse that you think might win a race in Ireland or England. Like, you go out to buy the horse that you think might be a, champion hurdle horse or a Gold Cup horse or
a superstar.
Big races in Cheltenham.
And do you have a prototype when you're watching that racing, right? When you're at a race meet, a random race meet in France, what is it that your eye is looking for when you say you're watching them?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't buy a 5-year-old. It's usually a 3 and 4-year-old. Bar it was a cross-country horse or something like that, but usually a 3-year-old and 4-year-old, and you just like to see. It might not be the horse that wins the race. It might be a horse that's unlucky and finishing second or third, but you might buy him. It's just something that catches your eye. That I suppose I've been in racing for so long now. It sort of comes a little bit more natural to me than somebody that would just would start into the game. But it's really your instinct, really.
Was that a departure for JP, Charlie? In that, obviously, you can think of the really good French ready-made horses he had. Barracuda comes to mind. You mentioned the cross-country Easy's Land, romping home at Cheltenham. Probably didn't get the credit it deserved because of all the publicity about Tiger Roll. And he's had some very nice French horses down the years. But was this a departure where he would kind of try to source at a slightly earlier stage and get these embryo champions?
Yeah, that's right. We're trying to buy them as 3-year-olds so they wouldn't have too hard a time before they come here. If you leave it any longer, they've had a lot of racing out there. Like, they're in training at, since they're yearlings, really. They're broken as yearlings, and they're just more forward. I don't think they're any better bred than ours. I just think their system is more forward, and that's why the horses are. They seem to be able to run earlier and stay going if you look after them properly.
And look, I'm sorry to labour the point, but when you're saying it's instinct, I understand exactly the point you're making there. That you've been in the game for so long. You see a horse and you see its gait and you see the size and you see the shape of its gallop. Is there a specific prototype that you look for, though? Like, if you think if you think a horse is going to be a champion, and that's the criteria, that this is going to be a Gold Cup horse, that you're only buying a horse that has a specific type of engine or that is a set size even. Like, is it as preordained as that? Like, if
yeah, that's right. A small horse usually they're not going to be chasers, but you do get the odd exception. But Defi de Sol is one that I bought that he's not over big, but is a good chaser. But most of the smallish ones, you're kind of thinking hurdle route, maybe champion hurdle route. Like Epitante, when we bought her, she was very impressive, winning a bumper in France, and a blind man would have saw her, being impressive. That that you couldn't, but like her. But when I went to see her, then her conformation wasn't fantastic, and she wasn't very big. So it put me off a little bit, but I was so impressed by the way she did it that I thought JP, I thought we should have her.
What sort of difference would that make in costing, in terms of, are you already sort of thinking then, okay, she's very exciting, we just maybe kind of obliged to run her solely over hurdles, and is that obviously that would potentially kind of prohibit her chances over fences, and then is that factored into the sort of cost that you're going to end up paying?
I suppose it does, because it's all about haggling at the end of the day, and you do say to the owner that this horse isn't that big, and where are we going to go next of it? We think it's good, all right, but if you can't jump fences, there's only a hurdle route to go of, and so you do sort of haggle a little bit, and you can.
I would have thought you were too nice to be a good haggler now, to be honest, Charlie.
You get them a little bit cheaper if if they're not the biggest.
When you say with Epitante, was it her conformation wasn't very good? What does that mean?
Well, first of all, she's not the tallest. She's not the tallest. She's quite narrow, and she wouldn't be the most correct. It means she's a little bit back of the knee. So some people don't like that, but some people don't mind it. But the experts say that you shouldn't buy a horse back of the knee, but it doesn't always, it's not an exact science. So
that's the thing about this, isn't it? And I guess that's what I was getting at when I was asking you to explain a little bit about the instinct, that this isn't, there's definitely a lot of science in it, but it's more art than science, where it's your ability to assess something that the rest of the world can look at the same way and come up with a different conclusion that separates the people who can buy horses that go on to be champions from other people who are looking at the same horse and going, nah, I don't like the back of the knee on that one, I'm not going to be involved here.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's the same when, we buy foals and we sell them as 3-year-olds, but when we're selling them at the sales, they have to be correct and they have to walk well, but it doesn't mean they're going to be the perfect racehorse, But yet, when we're selling them, they have to be they have to tick all the boxes, because if they don't, all these experts won't buy them, because they haven't run or anything at this stage. So you have to have a correct horse, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to be any good. The horses that are a little bit back the knee or a bit crooked or whatever.
Yeah.
They can be racehorses.
Yeah, of course. We're nearly 20 minutes in here and we haven't talked about your career as a jockey yet. And I'll get to that in 1 minute. I want to ask one last question about this in terms of the level of enjoyment and fulfilment you get from... Obviously, you buy a horse like Epitante and it wins at Cheltenham. That's a sensational thing. You buy Defi de Soy and it's like, wow, what a great horse to be involved with. From your own perspective and the horses you have back on your own farm, getting a 1-year-old to be a 3-year-old who then goes on to be something special, is there a difference in actually having that horse on your land for 18 months or 2 years and watching them grow into something special?
Oh, it is. You're feeding them every day, and you're kind of hoping, God, maybe one day he might be might win the Champion Hurdle, a Gold Cup, or something in Cheltenham. And I haven't had a Cheltenham winner yet from the ones I've sold, but we've had some good horses. But it does make it worthwhile when they go out and do things like that,
Yeah, I've no doubt. If anybody wants to get involved in this conversation, you can WhatsApp us here. 087 9180 180 is the number. Johnny, for a bit of context, please, can you tell us a little bit about just how amazing a horse Istabrac was? Because I think that obviously in the racing community, everybody understands that this is a watchword for absolutely sensational. The rest of the sports community might have forgotten, as other horses have kind of come and gone over the last decade and a half. But Istabrac was as good and as dominant a horse over a specific type of course as any horse has ever been in any era. Is that fair?
Yeah, you won't get horses winning champion hurdles like he did. Strange enough, Istabrac was before my time actually getting into racing. I just got into racing a little bit after, but that didn't mean I didn't kind of hear an awful lot about him. I suppose if ever there were a horse that was synonymous with a jockey, it was Istabrac and Charlie Swan, and also the fact that he was trained by Aidan O'Brien and he ran in really famous colours, that of JP McManus, and I suppose he was, it's easier to punt horses nowadays, I think, than it did when Istabrac was running. You've a far more, punters have kind of far more opportunities to look at the form, to look at videos, look at this or that. In those days, the punters, bankers were a little bit harder to come by maybe, and it was harder to form your opinion. But Istabrac was that banker, and I think maybe the most telling thing about Istabrac was the fact that when he had his final race and he was pulled up despite being a strong favourite, and Charlie will tell this story a lot better than I will, obviously, he was given an unbelievable reception from the Cheltenham crowd as he came back past the stands, and that just defies that inherent kind of gambling urge that you'd associate with horses. This was much more than that. It was because everybody loved Istabrac and what he represented, be they British or Irish.
Charlie, do you remember the very first time that you were on Istabrac? Do you remember that first experience of Istabrac? What was that like?
I do, yeah. I rode him in the Curragh one day, schooling over hurdles, and I remember Aidan said to me, that he thinks this horse is really special, and I schooled him, and from the first jump, he never went to run out. He just took on his hurdles, and he was just total natural to jump, which is quite unusual for a flat horse,
So just explain that.
You know what? Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, Ger, just to cut in there. I really thought that Sir Eric could have been that type of horse, and I know it was very early days. I know he was only a juvenile hurdler, but everything he did, I thought, was so natural. And as much as he's a year passed on now, I thought that Charlie, he had, for pretty much the same connections, had the potential to be every bit as special if he developed along the lines.
That's right, Johnny. I thought the very same. I thought he had everything as well. He stayed and he jumped. It was just very unfortunate, wasn't it? Yeah.
Charlie, I think a lot of people, we would have a lot of people who watch and listen to the show who are kind of just getting into racing over the last year or so. So will you just explain about how Istabrack was actually a flat horse, but then becomes one of the great jump horses of all time?
Yeah, he was in John Gosden's, and he won a couple of flat races. And John Durkin, John was meant to train him, but unfortunately he got leukemia, and he suggested that Aidan would train him, but he wasn't a top class horse on the flat, but he thought he'd make a very good jumper and a good staying type jumper. So when I started riding him, the first day obviously he jumped really, really well, and I always had it in my head like this horse could be a stayer's hurdle type horse, a staying horse. Mm. But and that's why we sort of went down the route of the Sun Alliance, because Aidan thought as well that he wasn't the quickest.
That's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, and he actually got quicker. But I think it was because he jumped so quick. His jumping made up for, that he wouldn't be that quick. But because he jumped so quick, it sort of, it just helped. It just helped him be quicker because he was such a good jumper. But I think a good horse is really a horse that can stay but has the speed to lie up, and that's the difference of a good horse and a bad horse. That the good horses can go really, really fast and keep going for a long time. So that's what you're looking for, and that's why, because Istabrack was such a good jumper, and he stayed. That's why he was so good, really.
Do you know what's funny, Charlie? Because there's so much emphasis on horses jumping fences and how amazing it is. I think people don't appreciate how good spectacle it is to see a horse brilliant at his hurdles. And you look at Envoy Allen, the way he jumps. If you look at Harchball back in the day, and Istabrack, and maybe there's not enough premium on that ability to just like bang, bang, bang over like A to B as quickly as possible over hurdles. Yeah,
no, it's amazing. Like over the years, I've ridden some high-class flat horses that have gone jumping, and they've just have no technique at all. And it's 2 or 3 stone in the difference. Like they can be rated 114 on the flat, which is very high. It's a sort of a...
And similar over hurdles.
Yeah, and over hurdles, they might not win off 90. It can be just... If they can't jump, like a bad... a horse that doesn't have much ability, if he's a good jumper, it makes up for so much.
How did Istabrack get good at jumping then? That's the bit that I really don't understand, is that like if a horse is a bred flat horse, then all of a sudden one day you guys like stick him over fences, or maybe it's not over fences straight away, but like there's a bit of training going on. You're like, okay, let's school him. And it turns out to be one of the great jumpers, like a kind of hidden talent.
Yeah, well, I suppose he was a half-brother to a Derby winner, to Secreto, that won the English Derby. So he had that, and he was by-saddler as well. So, and he could jump. So it did make things a little bit easier for him, I think.
And was it almost an accident that you found out he could jump? Was it because he wasn't going well over the flat? They were like, okay, look, let's send him over fences and we'll see, and that might put a bit of manners on him almost.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think he cost 36,000 at the sales, so he wasn't an expensive horse for what his breeding was and whatever. But because he he jumps so well, he just made up for everything. But you don't know how they jump when you buy them because you can't see them jumping, obviously. You know? So it is a bit of a guessing game that way. You're hoping that, I mean, every horse will jump, but it's about getting to A to B as quick as you can, you know.
The adrenaline that you feel from winning the races that you feel when Istabrac is coming up that hill and so dominant, what's that actually like? Is that something that you ever recover from?
Look, it was a fantastic feeling, but at the end of the day, when you go by the line, it was a lot of relief because there was so many people that that would have backed him, and that people loved the horse. So there's always a bit of pressure when you're riding horses like that. But it was a fantastic feeling. Obviously, every time you'd win those champion hurdles on him, it was amazing. Yeah,
you kind of came alive at Cheltenham. Is that fair comment?
Yeah, I suppose. I suppose I'm naturally a little bit of a show off, so probably when you get the big stage, I probably used to ride better on the big stage because I like to impress, but that was me. But Cheltenham, there's nothing more for a jockey than riding winners in Cheltenham.
It's good to be good around the most important place. That's like a nice trait, a nice a character trait. Obviously, Istabrac was denied the opportunity because of foot and mouth to do. Was it the fourth? Would that have been the fourth year in a row at the?
Yeah, a bit like Poro Tiger Road this year for the for the Grand National. It was hard to take really at the time because he was in great form, and then he came back, which would have been his fifth champion hurdle. But unfortunately, he pulled up. And like Johnny was saying, the crowds were amazing that day. They clapped him the whole way in. It was a lot better than the day when I retired. The day I retired from riding, I sort of said it the day before that I was retiring the following day, and I had 2 rides the following day. And my second last ride, I got a fall at the last. The horse was going to probably finish third, and when I was coming in, everybody was clapping me. But there's always one person said, "You should have retired yesterday." So there's always somebody that. But
probably in your mind, you're probably thinking, "This lad, what an absolute asshole!" And then if you did meet him for a pint afterwards, he might actually be all right. And he thought it was funny at the time, but I'm sure it wasn't funny at the time.
Now, Johnny, you're not getting off for this one. Was that you? Is that what you're doing here? Is this?
I'd only do that behind the keyboard, like all the keyboard warriors,
Well, I didn't put in the language now, he said. But
maybe you're as well not to have a pint with him. Can I ask you then about the pulling up at Cheltenham and having that response where you kind of do transcend just the pressure of being on board a favourite and the fact that there is a responsibility to those people who've backed the horse and the people who've got the horse ready for it, that actually, in a weird way, that's almost a more important moment, that you've earned the right for everybody to pour love on the horse and you.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was very emotional, actually. I can remember, God, I was nearly crying coming in, the claps he was getting and everybody saying well done, and it was great. And luckily he wasn't too badly injured. Like 3 months later he was perfectly all right again.
Charlie, you made the decision, I think, I'm right in saying there's not that many people who've done it, to be both a jockey and a trainer at the same time for the last couple of years of your career as a jockey. In retrospect, would you have given yourself more opportunities as a trainer if you'd waited to becoming to finish up as a jockey and then become a trainer?
I don't know. It's hard to know. I suppose it's hard when you're still riding. That I think you always have in your head that trainers might not put you up because they're afraid you're going to rob their owners. Which is, you can't blame them for thinking that way, or you can't blame me for thinking that way. But I don't know whether it would have made a difference or not. when I started training, everything was going great, and I ended up, I think in my second or third year, I'd over 100 horses, and it just got a little bit difficult when you're trying to ride and trying to train at the same time. It did get a little bit, difficult when the numbers started getting up.
In retrospect, why did you stop training? What was obviously a difficult enough decision, I suspect. So we had Barry Garrity on last week, and he was saying he keeps a few horses at the moment, and it sounds a little bit like a smaller version of what a lot of people are doing. But he definitely seemed to kind of nail the notion that he would be interested in training, whereas there's other jockeys in training at the moment, or there's other jockeys who are kind of coming to the end of their career, and you can kind of see them already. They have an eye on becoming a trainer. For you, what was the decision to stop training like? What ultimately led you to that?
I suppose at the end of the day, when you're not making money, my accountant used to kept saying to me, if you don't have 50 horses, you're losing money. So I think I had about 36 or 37 horses in, and it was the time of the recession, really, or just after the recession, but things weren't really picking up in the training game, and I just said, if I go on another 6 months, I'm putting in all the money that I've that I rode for and earned in my riding career, and I was starting to lose money. So that's really, it comes down to, if you're not making money, you have to do something else, don't you?
Yeah.
As much as these trainers there as well are having, so many trainers are probably on the breadline, or the money they make isn't actually from training, it's from sort of ancillary activities. How worried would you be, Charlie, now for trainers in light of the next month to 2 months or whatever it is of basically no horses, and obviously owners taking their horses out of yards?
Yeah, that's, it's going to be really, really tough. That's why it's really important that, as soon as we can get back, racing behind closed doors again, the sooner we can do it, the better for the industry, because there'll be so many people who will be out of jobs and will have to give up, because owners aren't going to have the horses in training if this is going to go on for 3 or 4 months. People aren't going to have the horses in training, whatever, and it's a knock-on effect. You can't, if you don't have the horses, you have to get rid of the staff, unfortunately. And that's why it's so important that we get back racing as soon as we can, and
it's even if people had a date as well, that, like, I was speaking to Joseph O'Brien yesterday, you can train a horse perfectly well if you know that we're returning on May 9th or whatever. It's the uncertainty that kind of adds to the muddle.
Yeah, I know. I suppose as soon as we see the numbers coming down, I suppose we have an idea that we're starting to get out of it. But I think it's very hard when you don't have a date, isn't it? When you're trying to train horses, but at the same time you have to keep going and hope, hopefully by sometime in May we're back racing again.
There was one last thing I wanted to ask you about, Charlie, and that was coming out of retirement last September for the Champions race for Pat Smullen. What was that experience like? Because we've got the Keep Cup that is a fundraiser for Pat Smullen, and there's all the great jockeys on it, and it's like, wow, what a race that was! So many legends. To be in the middle of all that must have been great. And did your competitive instincts kick in? What was that whole thing like?
I did. It was great. There was a great bunch of lads riding in it, and it was like Pat is such a nice fella, and as well as being a nice fella, he was a brilliant jockey. So obviously, when I was asked to do it, there was no second thoughts. I said yes straight away. Pat's a great fella, and it's for a great cause. But it was great. It was great fun. Everybody was so competitive. It was unbelievable. Actually, people were still competitive, even though they've retired or whatever. Everybody wanted to win the race, but I think we were all glad that Tony won it, because he would have been devastated.
It was a special. It was a really special occasion that day, because there was a lot. There was a lot of things going on, I think, in the minds of people that really had almost nothing and everything to do with racing, in the sense that we all fear that time when our body isn't able to do the things it used to be, you know, be it a sports person or a jockey or just in your general work. And, you know, in light of the fact that Pat had this illness, you also had the fact that you had jockeys who were coming back to ride and experiencing that buzz that they'd, I suppose, lost, and that competitive nature, if only for, you know, whatever it was, the 80, 90 seconds of that race. It must have almost felt, if ever briefly, that you had gone back to those days where you were riding against these legends and you were at the peak of your powers.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when we jumped off in the race, it felt as though it was only a year or two since I rode. You know, that's what it felt like. You kind of, everything sort of comes back to you, whatever. But I was glad it was only a mile at the end of the day.
Well, Charlie, we wish you the very best of luck with everything that's going on at the moment. Thanks so much for being very generous with your time this Friday afternoon, and stay well.
No problem. Thanks, Ger. Thanks, Johnny. Cheers.
Thanks, Ger.
Bye.
Charlie Swan there, a legend of the game. Johnny, thanks to you as well. You stay well too. Friday Night Racing, a reminder, is brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Love every racing moment. Visit hri.ie. We'll be back next Friday afternoon at around about the same time, 3 o'clock on all of our social channels, or of course 8 o'clock on the radio on News Talk as well. Take care.
Friday Night Racing
on Off the Ball.
Brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Love every racing moment. Visit hri.ie.